Why is the necromancer so jacked? It's from all the deadlifting.
Uh-oh, retard alert! Retard alert, class!
Presenting the short bus veteran. So I want to take this moment now to talk about necromancy in story writing, a very typical type of character class used in many stories, video games included. And that's kind of what jump-started this idea where I wanted to kind of cover necromancy and how it kind of should be told in stories, and how in some, mainly in video games, it's being used or not used. I find that a lot of times, and video games can have an excuse when it's for gameplay over the story lore or whatever. I'll go into examples for that. But we have, for example, in Baldur's Gate 3, there's a necromancer, and people, for the most part, like, it's looked as evil, but it's not like people should be like 99% being like, yeah, not cool. That's a super taboo. We're not okay with that. There's something that happens early in the Baldur's Gate game that allows you to control like an undead NPC. Now, I would have assumed that the companions would have reacted very strongly for you using something like that. It's just a type of magic, pretty much anyone's magic system, that should be considered a taboo. Now, people don't like being told what they can and can't do in their own story writing, but for a more realistic, grounded perspective in your writing, having people not seeing necromancy, raising the dead, as a taboo is very strange and would come across the average reader as strange. Therefore, you'd run into a problem because, yeah, you're not going to please everyone. And I'm not saying you can't have it in the story, because if there's one thing that somebody kind of just doesn't agree with or something like that, then it's going to ruin the book. That's not necessarily going to happen. But it's just something to keep as a thought and maybe consider in your own writing, because it is something that can actually add some depth into your own story with having taboos and stuff like that, and take away that vanilla-ness of just accepting everything, which is kind of where I see the direction of things going with necromancy. See, now people are just like, oh yeah, that's just a part of your thing that you do, that's your job, and you're raising the dead, and hey, I'm not to judge. It's hard to believe that a religion, even made up, wouldn't find it as a taboo. You would have to put in a lot of explanation of why they don't find it taboo, which that could be interesting if you write and explain that. And then you can very much have an acceptable form of people accepting necromancy in the culture. But just to be like, oh yeah, it's fine, we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to mention it, and it's like, okay, why is this culture like totally cool with people raising their families dead or whatever? That would strike an alert in the average reader's mind, being like, that's weird. Because look, everyone in this world pretty much, and besides some of the places that don't have internet or are super communist or something like that, I don't know, they consider the thought of somebody raising the dead, even though that's not possible, the thought of that would be weird and taboo, especially when it comes to the point where there's a random person controlling that dead. So why would these fantasy people, or whoever in your story, why would they not also be acting alarmed? And it goes more into just necromancy. We could just talk about dark arts in general, and that's where I was kind of thinking about Warcraft, where one of the classes you can play is a warlock. Warlocks are definitely looked as evil, but for the gameplay aspect, they allow the players to play as a warlock, and I understand that, but it is kind of lore breaking and immersion breaking when you're playing the game. Now, I think, though, people would agree that for the gameplay value that you're getting out of playing that class, it outweighs the lore breaking it does, because they kind of just ignore it when it comes into the lore. They just are like, yeah, there's players that play it, but forget about that. Let me go back to the immersion breaking aspect of it. When in Baldur's Gate you go to a circus, it is definitely looked as strange and as a taboo that there's necromancy being practiced in this place. But again, I don't see how a kingdom would be like, yeah, no, that's definitely not cool. We're shutting this circus down. We're killing this necromancer. Unless, again, it's explained to the character or the observer that there's a lore reason, which it's not. And that is, I think, a fault. And I think people would agree with me on that. In stories like Full Metal Alchemist, there's the whole alchemy taboo of raising the dead is a huge no-no, right? That's kind of one of the biggest kickstarters of the story. Now, it's explained later in that story that it's illegal not because it's a taboo. Those are just coincidental, because it's illegal because they don't want them to raise an army. But it's definitely looked as a taboo, as something you shouldn't do. It's a slight against God or something like that, which that would make sense. It's very confusing, or would be very strange to not have something like that, which is so inherently evil and taboo, right? I think that's where it comes from. It's just like the thought of raising the dead is so inherently evil, where it's like, I don't know how you wouldn't have characters not reacting strongly to a necromancer being in the presence. And also having a necromancer like in your party. Again, you would have to explain that. Like games like Diablo, whatever, the world will kind of explain it, but it's a video game. We're allowing players to play that class, to have fun with that class. We excuse it. But in a book, comic book or something like that, you're not getting those excuses. So again, explain why it's taboo. Explain why it's not a taboo in that culture if you're going to do something like that. So how would you explain that it's not taboo in a story if I'm giving you that excuse? Well, Stranger in a Strange World, I think that's the title, gives a good explanation of why the Martians think cannibalism is okay. And after you read the book, you're like, okay, for this culture, I kind of understand it. And you don't think it's absolutely crazy, but you can't take away that inherent thought of it being crazy. So you could probably do the same with necromancy. You just have to have a god that they follow very strongly that gives them the moral acceptance of doing that. Or maybe the soul, like they have a better understanding how souls work, and they're like maybe make an agreement with the soul before they're revived or something like that. Or maybe their culture divides the soul and the body so much that when somebody raises a dead, they don't care, because at that point, after somebody dies, the body is completely different from the soul, disconnected completely. So they're able to not be emotionally connected to that after their culture engraves that thought into them so much. Again, an explanation like that might be interesting, might even cause people to want to read your story. So yeah, if you're going to do that, explain it. Otherwise, it comes off like you're missing the mark on something. And it sounds like your characters in here might be morally misguided. And it's not necessarily a problem if the character's morals don't align with the reader or, the author. Nobody's saying it has to align with that. You're writing a character. Not everything needs to be a self-insert. But it would make the characters unbelievable in the sense that it doesn't fit the world, because there's no explanation of why this isn't a taboo. And like I said, something like necromancy is going to be inherently a taboo with people. So you'd have to give an explanation. There's just some things in writing in general that are just going to be inherent. And necromancy is one of them. Hey, if you've listened to this video this far, guys, thank you. And please look into the description of this video, because I'm going to have my Iron Seas channel linked up, which I do a podcast every Tuesday, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, and it's just full of autistic fun. And at this point, I should mention, guys, I'm sorry, but you're retarded for listening this far. But that's okay, because if you read my book, you'll find out, again, in the description below, Illumination Toolsmith, it's Harry Potter meets the Office Space. It's probably the best book ever written. It is, just factually. But yeah, you'll learn why you are retarded and how everyone's retarded. But that's okay. We're just living in an autistic world. We just need to be aware of it.